are so many different currents in Marxism, obviously, because Marx's writings are very colorful. So they are a mixture, if you want, of British empiricism and German idealism and French socialism, to mention just three main currents here. And this is obviously a mixture which creates a lot of potential tensions, which Marx, who thought of himself not as a philosopher necessarily anymore, didn't really strive to resolve. All right, I already mentioned that a standard sociological reading of Karl Marx is rather structural functionalist, that it excludes social actors, and that also includes the influence of ideas, right? So historical materialism, with a focus on materialism, highlights the impact of material causes, so non-idea kind of causes. In what follows, I would rather like to bring up some aspects also of Marx's works that highlight a much more actor-focused and a much more also idea-focused reading of Marx than is usually presented in these textbooks. Okay, a little bit of background on Marx. So Marx lived between 1880 and 1883. So there was recently Marx's 200th birthday, and you might have seen the many publications on Marx's biography and his works again for this occasion. So Marx was basically born into then the 19th century, born in Trier, studied then in Berlin as well, and studied in the current of Hegelianism. Georg Friedrich Wilhelm Hegel was the main philosopher in Berlin up to 1831, and dominated, in a way, German idealism of his time, following on Immanuel Kant. After Hegel's death in 31, then there was a split in the disciples of his into a left Hegelian and a right Hegelian school. And you can interpret the left and right already a little bit in political terms. So the left Hegelians were much more radical, and they differed from right-wing Hegelians, if you want, from by the way in which they considered religion to figure in Hegel's system. So right-wing Hegelians thought about religion as being something like the apogee of the Hegelian system. Left Hegelians basically saw it just as one stage. Yeah, left Hegelians also were influenced by a philosophy of the praxis, or a practical philosophy. So they agreed with right Hegelians in that Hegel's system was the perfect philosophical system, but that it should be followed by, in a way, realizing his thoughts in practical philosophy. So you may recall Karl Marx's 11th Feuerbach thesis, which says that philosophers have up to now just interpreted the world. It is up to them now to change it. So this thesis, in a nutshell, summarizes this main idea of left Hegelians to exercise some kind of practical philosophy, whereas right-wing Hegelians thought that their role was simply to elucidate the complicated Hegelian system on a philosophical level without going any further. Yeah. So left Hegelians around Bruno Edgar Bauer, two brothers, Max Stirner, Arnold Ruge, they were soon becoming academic outcasts in the 1830s and 40s, when there was, in a way, a conservative reaction across Europe, with traditional rulers tightening their control of public opinion, of academia. And these left Hegelians lost all kinds of academic positions. Just as a footnote here, it's interesting to see how, let's say, this moments of surplus production of social science academics often in history goes along with a certain radicalization. And the 1830s here with the left Hegelians, including Karl Marx, is an instance of this general tendency, perhaps. This outcast or role as outcast was not just academic, but included also the life as a political citizen. So first, Karl Marx exited academia and started to publish newspapers in Cologne, for instance, but was soon persecuted also by Prussian authorities and had to leave into exile in first then Belgium, Brussels to Paris. In Paris, he met Friedrich Engels for the first time, and eventually he had to settle in London, where he stayed until his death. From his meeting with Friedrich Engels, the son of a textile producer from what is now Wuppertal, resulted in a lifelong friendship, and not just a friendship, but also a division of labor. So Engels inherited part of the textile plant and bought into a partnership in a plant in Manchester in the UK, and used his, if you want, capitalist income up until the publication of the Capital in the 1860s to finance Karl Marx and to help him out and to refrain himself from becoming more of an author he might have liked to be. So clear division of labor. There's a huge correspondence between Engels and Marx, who wrote up to 2 letters a day between London and Manchester at the time. And Engels did not send over a lot of money to Marx to support him, but also provided him with some real-life industrial figures on how capitalism works. Yeah, if you want to know more about this life and background, I can also really recommend these 2 biographies. There are also many more, but it's also very interesting to read up on Friedrich Engels, who is a little bit of an underestimated figure in all of this. So the societal background of the time is early industrialization. So in regions such as the north of France, then also the German Rhineland region, but above all, Lancashire and Manchester in the UK, the paper and textile production moved forward with sort of the steam engine. Yeah, there was in a way developing capitalism, even much more than the one that Adam Smith had observed in Glasgow. Politically, as I said, there was a conservative reaction in the 1830s and 40s. There was an eruption again of the 1848 revolution in Paris and also other areas in Europe. Friedrich Engels also fought himself in a revolutionary army in Germany at the time. So yeah, it was also a time of political turmoil, and the manifesto, which you read for today, was published also to, in a way, stimulate a real revolution of 1848 in Paris, which then resulted rather in the counter-revolution of Napoleon III. So Karl Marx was influenced by at least these different intellectual currents, that is French early socialism, which we already heard about a little bit in the last lecture. So Saint-Simon, and others who in the early 19th century already envisioned in a way utopias, industrial utopias, some of which were realized also as industrial cooperatives. Yeah. The second current then is British political economy and the empirical sciences, and here the liberal tradition is key, including also David Ricardo, who Marx also read a lot. Marx was also fascinated by the natural sciences of his day, so by evolutionary theory, right? He wanted to dedicate the Capital also to Charles Darwin, who was not very responsive to this dedication. And yeah, by a basic belief also in that the natural sciences description of the material world is somehow prior to any kind of more, let's say, philosophical or historiographic take on the world. I already mentioned then the German young Hegelianist movement as a background, and you may have heard of this expression of Marx that his intent was to turn Hegel on his head. And by this, we will see in a second what this refers to more exactly. By this, he basically means that there needs to be a philosophy of praxis, so a practical philosophy that follows this very theoretical Hegelian system. Yeah. This practical philosophy then agreed in that Hegel's system was the perfect philosophical one, but it had to be realized in a philosophy of action. And this also went along with a left Hegelian critique of religion as a phenomenon, and in a way, the start of an empirically minded study of a religion as a historically constituted system of belief. So in a way, something that the sociology of religion still does nowadays, following also Max Weber, with the idea being that God is just a social construction that is determined by the social strata of people believing in him, and by the socio-historical contexts that basically determine this kind of belief. And you may notice already that this explanation of belief systems, just with religion as one example, is also the starting point for Karl Marx's later critique of any kind of also political ideologies, where his critique of ideology is often based on pointing to the social origins of this ideology and people proposing a certain ideology. But yeah, so this criticism of religion was also one of the key aspects of this young Hegelianism. So Karl Marx's work was written obviously at a time when sociology was not a discipline, and his works encompass not only political economy, philosophy, even though he didn't wanted it to be philosophy, journalism. I mean, he wrote also for American newspapers, at least if he managed to keep the deadlines. Just a footnote, Marx was a fantastic procrastinator, so often missing deadlines. So we are not alone with that. End of the footnote. But some of his writing are clearly more sociological than others, and I just wanted to mention these. I mean, there's Engels' writings here on the conditions of the working classes in England, in a way, a very early flaneur-like, let's say, social inquiry of living conditions. The manifesto is also among the more sociological ones, certain parts of the Capital, also the letters, the correspondence, and Marx's analysis here of the failure of the 1848 revolution published under the 18th Brumaire. Yeah, so these are the more sociological writings. And other important works, more for the philosophical system. Then here is the German ideology, the Jewish question, the economic